Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at our Preparing for Farm Succession Planning workshop. This workshop is designed to give you some of the initial tools and first steps towards starting a farm succession or farm transition plan for your business. We want to thank our sponsor for these workshops, the Missouri Department of Agriculture. You'll be hearing from a representative, Ken Henderson, about the department's ag mediation services in just a minute. The rest of us today are all with the extension, the Ag Business Policy Extension Group. We've got Wesley Tucker, Katie Nooner, and myself, Mallory Ray. Thank you again for joining us. And the purpose of this workshop is to provide educational information. We believe every farm needs to have a good lawyer, a good tax accountant, and a good financial planner. We're not here to provide that service, but rather to provide some educational information as an overview. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ken Henderson. Thank you.
I'm Ken Henderson with Missouri Department of Agriculture. I'm actually the division director for grain inspection and warehousing, which we have the mediation program. So basically, the mediation program has been existed for several years, and it's sponsored through a USDA grant that we've applied for and have maintained for several years now. Basically, mediation is just bring the two parties together and try to meet mutual agreement. We found that if both parties are involved in the first step of that and come to agreement, the chances of that agreement being met in the future is exponentially higher than somebody else or one party making that decision or a third party making that decision for them. Mediation, we have two parties together, and typically, it's anywhere from a 2-hour to a morning, afternoon, and potentially additional days for the two parties to meet and try to meet a mutual agreement. Our experience is typically in the past has been through different USDA programs such as FSA, NRCS, or rural development. And in those, the farmer or the producer probably has an adverse decision letter. And through that, USDA has set up a process for mediation to So, in the mediation typically, I think we have some mutual agreements with rural development or RMA for crop insurance. That basically, it's bringing the parties together. We have mediated with RMA cases, FSA cases, and then we've done some outside mediation projects too. There again, we don't make the decision. We try to bring the parties together to help come to a consensus on to solve the problem. In instances where we have not been able to reach a written agreement, we found that both parties are better educated to proceed through the other means available to them, such as additional hearings in the future. So basically, through the grant process in USDA, it's very economical. It's much cheaper than litigation by all means. And as you see nationwide, about 75% succession rate where they've actually worked out agreements. So basically, these are the different issues that we can help mediate on. Through years, USDA has expanded what we're allowed to, or what they'll fund us to help with the mediation process. That includes pesticide issues, grazing. These are some of our successes we've had in the past year through crop insurance, high-risk insurance, rural housing, and we've also helped in contractual agreements. Succession planning is something too that we can potentially be involved in. The main reason we wanted to reach out with the assistance of the Missouri Extension Service is If we can get the word out and start you on that path of succession stories and planning, it greatly decreases potential conflict later down the road. And I've been fortunate to sit in. This will be the second one I've got to sit in on, and I find it very beneficial. And I hope you find it beneficial too. So basically, if you're interested in mediation or what maybe we can do for you, this is our phone number, 573-751-5528. And we just, or I'm sorry, 20. We encourage you to reach out to us, or you can email us there also. That's all the contact information. And we are housed within the Missouri Department of Agriculture. I think that pretty well covers it, Mallory. I hope you guys find this very beneficial, and it's been a privilege to help support this program.
Thank you so much, Ken. And for everybody who joined us a few minutes later, that was Ken Henderson with the Missouri Department of Ag talking about ag mediation services. I just put a link, the first of many we'll talk about today, in the chat. This is a PDF that will download and tell you more about the mediation services. So now we're going to launch our first poll. Again, this is a chance for us to be a little more interactive today. You should see that pop up right now. And we're asking you a question. Which of the following roles in farm transfer best describes you? Are you a senior operator or the spouse of a senior operator, somebody who's currently controlling the farm? Are you a second generation, third generation? Maybe you're not part of the family, but you're invested in the farm's future. Or are you here with a support agency today, a bank, an insurance company, something else? We know from past experience that a lot of different people come to the succession planning process. So this is just a chance for us to get a sense of who's in the room with us today. And it looks like we're pretty evenly split between senior operators and second generation to senior operators. And with that, I want to just talk about what we're going to do in today's workshop. So as I said, we're here to talk about those initial first steps. Back, Wesley, please. So we're going to talk about clarifying family roles and business roles to minimize conflict. We're going to talk about how to prepare the next generation for farm management and ownership. A step towards that process is actually talking about how to delegate responsibilities in the short term. And then finally, we're going to talk about intentional communications and how you can use family meetings as a way to accomplish that. All of these bullet points will have links in the chat for additional information and resources. After today's meeting, we really encourage you to look at that information and start applying it to your own farm business. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Katie Nooner, who will talk about some farm succession trends.
Thanks, Mallory. So good morning, everybody. I'm Katie Nooner. I'm an ag business field specialist in Lafayette County, Missouri. And for those of you that don't know where Lafayette County is, we are about an hour east of Kansas City, just south of the Missouri River. So we're going to get started here, if my technology will allow it. There we go. So we're going to talk about some trends today in farm succession planning. And the trends really give us the reason why succession planning is so important. So we are looking at USDA data from the last census, which was done in 2014. And in 2014, that data told us that farmers, don't really have necessarily the best plans for succession. So 10% of farmland that was expected to transfer between 2015 and 2019, 77% of that 10% was set to transfer to a relative. So either through a trust, a will, a gift, or a sale, farmers were planning on transferring their farmland to a relative. So that tells us that farmers want land to stay in their families, but they obviously need plans for farms to stay viable in order for those successors for their children and their grandchildren to be able to stay in the farming business. And as we look at the age of the primary decision maker on the farm, 59 years is the average age of the person that's making kind of those day-to-day farm decisions. So, and 66%, excuse me, of primary farm producers are 65 years and greater. So that really makes us ask the question, are we preparing farms and farm successors to succeed when 66% of the primary decision makers on the farm are 65 years and above? Are they really sharing their knowledge to the younger generations to be successful? And as we look at those that are getting towards retirement age, posing the question, are you planning on retiring or not? 52% of farmers really had no plan to retire. And I feel like that's very true. You talk to a farmer and the running joke is, what's retiring? They're going to farm until the day they can't climb up into the tractor anymore, or until the day that their wife finally takes the keys and hides them someplace because they really shouldn't be out there doing it. It's their passion. It's what they love to do in life. And so they can't see themselves doing anything else. 30% were really not sure. Are they going to retire or not? Well, maybe. And 17% said, yep, we know we're going to retire. We're ready to not be out here in the cold and the hot and dealing with drought and flooding and all those other crazy things that comes along with farming. And we're going to get out. So of this 17% that plan to retire, we asked them, do you have a successor plan in place? And this is what was really surprising, because only 19%, and that's highlighted here in this red box on your screen, had a successor in place that was either family or not family, but is already working on the farm. So 53% of even the people who were planning on retiring still had no succession plan in place. They knew they would like to retire, but they really had no clear path on how they were going to succeed that farm to the next generation or the next producer who was going to take that farm further. So that really is kind of the why and the data behind. We feel like succession planning is so important. And just lastly, we wanted to share a little bit of just Missouri data with you. We do have county data. So if you are interested in a particular county, drop a note in the chat and I can get that information for you. But with having this call being statewide, we just wanted to kind of represent Missouri as a whole. So we have 95,320 farms in Missouri. And kind of one of the things that I think was really an eye-opener for me, and, we want to preserve farming in the state of Missouri. 84 of the 114 counties in this state had a decrease in the total number of farms from 2012 to 2017. So we are losing farms in Missouri. And I know that for me personally, it really breaks my heart when you open the paper and you see that a Century Farm is going up for sale. It just makes you wonder why. Like, how could they prevent that? That's 100 years of tradition there, and you just really, it just kind of pulls at your heart and makes you a little bit sad, and we really want to hopefully help prevent that from happening if that is the will of the family. And lastly, in Missouri, the average age of the farmer is 57 and a half years old, and at 57, you need to kind of be thinking, what are those next steps? Is there someone else that is going to fill my shoes when it comes to the time when I'm no longer able to farm? So again, just a little bit of background on the data and the why behind succession planning. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our next producer, Wesley Tucker, and he is going to continue. Wesley? Oh, I have one more slide. I am sorry, I forgot about that. This one got thrown in. So, we did get all this data from the Ag Census. The USDA is getting ready to put out their next Ag Census this November. So we really want to encourage, anybody on this call to please fill that census out. This is where we get so much of our data from. Cash rental rates, average age of farmers, size of farms, all of those important things are asked in this survey. So please fill it out. I know it sometimes can be a little bit lengthy, but it is valuable information. And now I will turn it over to Wesley. So Wes, thanks.
Well, you got to love technology when it works, and when it doesn't work, you got to hate it, right? So thanks, Katie. I really appreciate that. I completely agree with everything Katie and Mallory and Ken have said. I really feel like we're at a tipping point. I feel like the next 10 years is going to make or break rural America. I really do, because we've got so many farms, and to be honest with you, even rural businesses on Main Street that are going to be changing hands from one generation to the next in the next 10 to 15 years. I throw this picture in for two reasons, because I always like showing a picture of my family, but also to show that I am one of you. I am also an ag producer. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this is seeing how my family went through this process as well. So to be honest with you, my background is a livestock economist. Last week, I was teaching a feedlot school. Next week or the week after, I'll be doing a grazing school. I could just as easily be up here talking to you about where I think cattle and grain prices are going to go in the next 6 months. But 10 years ago, I happened to be sitting in Memphis, Tennessee, in the National Women in Agriculture Educators National Conference. And I saw this guy whose picture is on your window, Dr. John Baker, who was the founder of the Iowa Beginning Farmer Center, present this slide right here. And when he showed this slide, a light bulb came on for me, and I realized that I needed to change some of my educational focus. He basically, with this slide, showed the point that if a farmer's priority is simply passing the land to their kids, then all they need is an estate plan. And any lawyer worth their salt should be able to help you do a trust and a will and all those things that we need to do to make sure that we avoid probate and make sure that our kids get our assets. So we just need an estate plan. We pass our stuff to our kids, check the box, we're done. But unfortunately, the point he made was that if your goal is actually not just passing your stuff, but actually seeing your farm business continue, then to be honest with you, before you do estate planning, you've got to do a succession plan. And so I'll be honest with you. Yeah, you've got a lot of assets to think about transferring from one generation to the next. But if you signed on today thinking we were going to talk about wills and trust and probate and powers of attorney and all of that stuff, unfortunately, you may be disappointed, because we're not going to talk about that. We are going to focus much more on, do you have your business successor prepared, and are you giving them the best chance to be successful? And Dr. Baker, when he showed this slide and just explained it, I learned so much about how that succession planning is way more important than estate planning. Now, you still need estate planning. It's still a very valuable part of the process. You still need that, but you got to do succession planning first. I saw this slide in 2012. Then 1 year later, my father passed away in 2013. And my wife and I's operation was just like a lot of yours. We had our own operation and my parents had theirs, but we did lots of things together. We shared equipment, we shared genetics. We worked cattle at my place, we worked cattle at their place. We did everything together, and my family's relatively small. I've only got one sister. But simply even going through this process, I come to realize just how absolutely critical this is if we want to see our operations survive after we're gone. I actually joined the International Farm Transition Network that Dr. Baker had founded, because you might be surprised, this is not just a United States thing. Farmers in rural communities all around the world are really, really struggling with this process of the farms actually being able to continue from one generation to the next. Now, I would like to challenge you to think about what is the hardest part of being in business with family. And I know this is going to be just a little bit clunky, because we've got we're doing this virtually. But for those of you that can chat, can put something into the chat, I'd like to encourage you to put something in chat about what you feel like the hardest part of being in business with family is. There's lots of different things, and I've heard lots of different answers, but you would think being in business with those you love would be the easiest, but it can be very, very difficult. So if you've got a keyboard, or if you're on your iPhone and can chat in, I'd challenge you to put just a few things in chat about what's so challenging about that. All right, getting on the same page, different goals, managing priorities and resolving differences, different visions. I'm seeing someone put differing opinions, different ideas, too many leaders, not enough followers, communication. I'll give just a few more moments. They are greedy and think everything is a handout. 4 kids, 2 want to, and the other 2 cannot financially or able to do the work. Okay. We're going to talk about how many kids you have and how that can complicate matters. Well, I would encourage you to go ahead and, if you have a chance, put something in there. I know some of you don't have a keyboard, but the reality is you are exactly right. There's all kinds of reasons, different goals, different desires, all kinds of different things, communication that you guys have identified. And I really feel like one of the things that we often overlook is just how difficult it is when we have the clash of 2 systems, when we have a family system and a business system constantly colliding. Are we family members today, or are we business partners? I'll be honest with you. I drove all the way to Fargo, North Dakota to spend 3 days with Dr. Baker, who I was telling you earlier, showed that slide, and learned from him as my mentor. And, I thought he was going to spend 3 days talking to me about trust and contractual agreements and things like that. But you know what I learned in 3 days? We spent 3 days talking about family dynamics, because unfortunately, folks, families are messy. I would challenge you to come up with a more unique situation than what I have heard from different families that I've had the opportunity to work with. Families are messy. I have a 14-year-old daughter who starts high school next week, and she gets tired of me saying, hey, whenever you're involved with teenage girl drama, I'm sorry, people are messy. And families are no exception. Families are probably the worst. Just think about the last time you worked cattle with your spouse. Did it go well or not? Often we will say and do things with family members that we wouldn't with others. And if you think about it, the family system is all about being loyal and affectionate and supportive and understanding. We don't like change. The business system is pretty much exactly the opposite. It's very aggressive, innovative. It tries to exploit change. It's all about being profitable. They are constantly colliding. And so family businesses are actually the hardest to run, and often, unfortunately, have the lowest success rate. I stole the image of the Staples Easy button. I wish I had the Staples Easy button to make this work, but it's not easy. It takes a lot of hard work. And one of the things that I think we're going to really, really talk a lot about today is, do we get extremely intentional with our communication? When I ask people, what's the key to a good marriage, 9 out of 10 people will immediately say communication. Communication is important for a good marriage. But then I say, well, how many of you have a regular date night? And almost no one raises their hands. Well, if we know communication is important, why don't we have regular date night? Well, the reason is because life gets in the way, right? There's always a group of cattle that needs to be worked, or a field that needs to be sprayed. There's always something that is soaking up our time, something that needs to be done. So we will not have a regular date night unless we put it on the calendar and we protect that time with our spouse. It's the same thing in a family business. We will not have the necessary communication that we need in a family business to deal with issues that come up and make sure that we're all on the same page unless we get extremely intentional about it, unless we schedule meetings, unless we schedule time to be together and to talk about things where we're not constantly being distracted. And so that's one of the things later on in this program today, we're going to talk about trying to actually put meetings on the calendar and making sure we're dealing with those issues. And not only does that clash affect our business, it also affects our family. This is a quote from one of my colleagues at the University of Wyoming. And I loved it because he basically summed up that when you become an adult, if you are not in business with family members, when you become an adult, you get out from under your parents' control. You're no longer, subject to what they tell you have to do. But unfortunately, when we're in business with our family, it doesn't matter if we are 25, 15, or 50, we are still assumed to be a subordinate. So it affects us in the business, but then it spills over of how we view our family relationships as well. And so how do we get through this? Randy summed it up with the last sentence. Roles have to constantly be negotiated and discussed. And that's basically what we're talking about. How do we get very, very intentional about communicating and dealing with those things? I want to back up and just kind of start thinking about, are we really preparing the next generation to be our successor? A typical farm succession plan starts as soon as you are able to reach the clutch on a tractor or carry a feed bucket, you're given chores, right? So you're basically considered a grunt. Now, when you become 18 and are considered an adult, hopefully you become an assistant manager, or what I really call grunt level 2, right? Because you're given lots and lots of responsibility for what? Labor, production, but you're never really given management authority until one day you become the key decision maker or the CEO of the business. But what has to happen for me to progress from assistant manager to CEO? Unfortunately, someone has to die. That is the cold, hard facts in the family business often. We don't ever get a chance to be the key decision maker in the business until the generation above us dies. One of my colleagues tells the story about a guy in his mid-60s that came to her and he was asking, at what age should the younger generation start making management decisions? And she looked at him, she said, hey, I know your son. He's 47. He's on the school board. He's very, very smart. There's no reason why you shouldn't be letting him make some of the management decisions. Come to find out, he wasn't talking about his son. His 83-year-old father was still making every decision. And so here he was in his mid-60s, and he was still just an assistant manager or grunt level 2. He had never been given the chance to go up to CEO and wouldn't until his 83-year-old father passed away. That, unfortunately, is very, very common in many of our family businesses. Again, I told you, I don't ever miss a chance to show pictures of my family. This is my wife and daughter in the mountains of Colorado. My wife and daughter would rather be horseback riding than about anything. So we always try to plan one big trip every year. And, one of the key things is when we decide where our destination is going to be, we have to figure out how we get from where we live to that destination. So we need a map, right? So we would grab out that 50-page atlas. Now we just plug it in our phones and it tells us, okay, you need to take this road and then you need to turn on this and then you need to turn here. That's essentially what a succession plan is, folks. It basically says, here is where we are at today. Here's where we're at today. All right. Where do we want to be next year? And where do we want to be 2 years beyond that? And then 2 years beyond that? And ultimately, when is this business going to become the next generations? If you do not remember anything that we say this morning, I want you to remember this right here. Succession planning is a process, not an event. See, estate planning is an event. Estate planning basically says, okay, I'm over here on the left side of the screen and everything I own and control is mine. It's all mine. And then I'm going to hold it very, very tightly in my hands until the day I die. And then tomorrow it all becomes my son or daughter's. That's an event. All right. That's estate planning. Succession planning essentially says, okay, here I am today over here on the left-hand side of my screen. By next year or the year after that, I want my son or daughter being in charge of these assets. And by the way, I want them owning some of them as well. 2 years beyond that, I want them in charge of this other group of assets, controlling this part of the business. And I want them owning some of those assets. And then throughout the next 5 to 10, 15 years, however long you're planning on it, I want it becoming theirs. It is a process. I don't want to ask my son or daughter to come back to the operation and spend the next 25, 30 years working for me. And hopefully someday this will all be yours. You know, I mentioned that, showed that picture of us in Colorado. Here is where I slowed down at the top of a huge hill to let my truck cool down. Well, if you look back here in the backside of this slide, there's a little sign. And if I zoom in on that, that is Wolf Creek Pass. And I don't know if any of you have been through Wolf Creek Pass in Colorado, but it is this little bitty, very sharp corner that if you don't know it's coming around the corner, and if you ignore the signs and don't slow down, you're very likely going to go off the edge of the mountain to your death. Okay. Well, there are lots of things that can derail us, in succession planning if we're relying on the event of estate planning to do that. Okay. You know, it might be something like the nursing home. If my dad says this will all be yours someday, come back and work in the operation, and hopefully this will all be yours someday. But unfortunately, my mother or father have to go in the nursing home. I may not get any part of the farm. It may all go to the nursing home. Often we think about things like divorce and disability. I always think it's interesting that the older generation always is concerned about their son or daughter getting a divorce. What if mom or dad get a divorce? I've been a part of several of those family situations where a son or daughter has been a part of the operation for many, many years. And unfortunately, mom and dad decide to go their separate ways and the farm gets split. Okay. What about remarriages? You know, often the woman outlives the man. And I'll be honest to some of you women, one of the biggest challenges of your son or daughter getting the farm may be if you die first. Because if the dad dies first, often mom will stay a widow. But if mom happens to die first, what's your husband going to do? Most men get remarried within about 12 months, folks. They do. It's just the reality of life because they need someone to take care of them. We men truly need someone to take care of us, okay? And I've come to decide, because the widow women outnumber the widow men by such a great large proportion, that the official mourning period is approximately 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, widow women will start bringing him casserole dishes, and not in disposable containers, ladies and gentlemen. It's just, that's not the way it works, all right? They've got to come back to pick them up. So the reality is, what if I've been part of this operation for 25 years, I don't own any part of it, and then dad decides to marry someone 20 years his younger with another set of kids? Am I going to get the farm, or does his new wife's kids get the farm? I don't want to rely on the event of estate planning to transfer the business. That's why it's so important to be thinking about this ahead of time. I always think about 5 phases of succession planning. The first one is, before my son or daughter can come back to the operation, I want to send them away to get education and experience elsewhere. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean college. Not everyone needs to go to college, but I want them to go somewhere to get exposure to how we do things differently elsewhere. I used to say, whenever I was a kid growing up, I worked for two big, large operations in my county, and they were as different as night or day as the way they functioned. One of them, you did not step foot on a tractor until you had checked the oil and the hydraulics. The other one was always in financial distress and was ran by a shoestring. And so it didn't matter if something was breaking down, you were expected to run it until it died, you know? And so there was just very different ways of doing things. If I've got a large grain operation, I want my son or daughter to go learn about grain merchandising. I want them to go get exposure to some other aspect of the business that they can bring that information back home. When they do come back home, I generally start with a trial work period, which is a period of 1 to 2 years, basically to test and say, can we really work together? You know, because I've already told you, being flesh and blood does not guarantee success. It actually makes it more difficult. So we want to go through a short period and end with an honest evaluation of saying, yeah, I think dad and I can work together and not kill each other. And dad will be the other side saying, yeah, I think my son and I can get along and this can be successful. Sometimes when we do that honest evaluation, it is better for us to say, Nope. Let's just stay family. Let's just stay family. Let's go our separate ways as far as business goes. You can have your operation, I can have mine. And it's just better for everyone involved if we just stay family. It'll be better for the family and it'll be better for our businesses as well. But one of the things that you've got to make sure you realize is that trial work period has to end. It has to end and progress to phase 3. If your son or daughter has been working for you for 25 years and they do not own anything, they are still just getting paid to work in your operation, then you are failing them. Because I want them to progress to phase 3, which is where they start the pathway to both management and ownership. I want them in charge of something. One of my operations tells the story that, you know, whenever he was a very young man, his dad sent him to the sale barn and said, I want you to go buy your own pen of calves, and I want you to make the decisions how you're going to feed them. Now, I will be here and I will answer any questions you have. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. And he said, you know, he said, I made some of the worst mistakes with that first group of calves that I bought and I fed, but my dad let me make the mistakes. Unfortunately, all too often, we micromanage our kids. One of my colleagues tells the story about one of his larger farmers was so proud of his legacy when he had 2 sons in the operation. They had always been there. They never left. They had always been a part of the farm. One was in his 30s, one was in his upper 20s. Unfortunately, that farmer was killed in a farming accident. And the real horror of the story is 1 month later, the 32-year-old committed suicide. And when he did, he left a note and he said, every day of my life, my dad told my brother and I exactly what he expected us to do that day. Now everyone is looking to me and I cannot handle the stress of being in charge of others and having to make decisions. We all too often, folks, micromanage our kids. There's lots of reasons why we do that. There's lots of reasons why, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but we need to be letting them become an adult and be putting in charge of some aspect of the business. It doesn't have to be a large portion of the business. You know, maybe if you're a dairy, you start them out running the calf running enterprise. Maybe if you're a crop producer, you say, hey, I'm going to let you take this farm and this lease farm that we have, and I'm going to let you run that one for yourself and see how you do it and let you make all the decisions on that. But not only do they need to be making management decisions, they also need to be owning something. Again, I don't want to wait till the funeral for them to start either buying their way into the operation or earning their way in. Now, I realize farming, we don't generate a whole lot of cash. So sometimes we've got to get really creative with our compensation plans. I get that. But, you know, we may not generate a lot of cash, but we build wealth because our assets appreciate, right? The combine's often worth more today than it was 10 years ago when we bought it. Our land is worth a whole lot more today than it was when we bought it 10, 20 years ago. So maybe we create a compensation plan that allows them to earn a small portion of some of the assets over time. But I want something becoming theirs. I want you to remember the first automobile that was yours, okay? I am standing in front of the rusted out fender of this truck, so you don't see that hole in the fender in the picture. But think about yesterday you were driving mom and dad's automobile. Today you're driving yours. And it might be a clunker, folks, but it's yours. So I would armor all it. I would try to wash it and make it as pretty as I could before I went out on a date on Friday night, you know, because it was mine. It felt differently. This is really no different, guys and gals, than when I teach HR classes. I tell supervisors, you really want a motivated employee? Put them in charge of something. Let them rise and fall based on how much effort they're going to put into it. You really want to motivate an employee? Get creative with your compensation plan so that they earn more the harder they work. I want them on the pathway to management and ownership. Now, phase 4, if phase 3 was beginning path to management and ownership, phase 4 is advanced management and ownership. But here's the kicker for phase 4. It's got to go beyond just production decisions. And this is where most operations really stub their toe. you've got to be letting them be in charge of some of the finances, some of the purchasing, some of the marketing. Are you involving them with the landlord negotiations? Very, very important things like that. And we're not creating capacity in our son or daughter if the only decisions we're allowing them to make is when it's time to wean calves or when we're ready to start cutting beans. We've got to let them start having some of the financial decisions as well. And unfortunately, the checkbook is absolutely usually the last thing that we will pry out of the older generation's hands. Phase 5, the final phase, is they become the majority manager and owner, and the senior generation scales back. Now, if we're doing this right, hopefully there's another generation starting in phase 1 at this point. But I want to be very, very clear. This does not necessarily mean complete withdrawal by the senior generation. I don't want the senior generation to go home and watch Days of Our Lives and game shows for the rest of their life, or I don't necessarily even want them getting in an RV and traveling all the time. I still need them involved with the operation, and we're going to talk here in a little bit about why that is so important. But I do need you to realize that your role in the farm is going to change, okay? Now, in the 10 years that I've been doing this, I will tell you that the ones that have been truly successful almost seem like it's a seamless transition from phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4. And the reason why that's so seamless is because they're following the roadmap. Again, they backed up, just like my family trying to get from southern Missouri to Colorado. We know where our destination is, and we know that I've got to go through Kansas to get there. I've got to go through this road to get there. I know the transitions I've got to make, but they also communicate along the way. And I cannot stress enough the importance of getting extremely intentional, like we're going to talk about here in a moment, to make sure that we're having that communication and dealing with those issues as they arise. The other thing that I think is really important is that they're just able to separate business from family. Again, we want good family relationships. We want good business relationships. And the best way we can do that is completely separating them. To be honest with you, if I am helping a farm through a succession plan that is not involving family members, it's bringing little Johnny from down the road because none of my kids want to take over the farm. It's actually easier. It actually is, because we more openly communicate about things. Little Johnny's not going to work for me for 25 years without some type of agreement about when do I get to start buying some of the cows? When do I get to start leasing some of the ground? See, we're not constrained by those family relationships, but yet in the family, we don't talk about those things. Well, let's just wait. It'll all be yours someday. Let's just wait and we'll work it out. Okay. I get a chance to talk to a lot of beginning farmer groups. And after I've talked to the younger generation, I put this back up and I say, okay, tell me where you're at in this process. Are you still locked in phase 2? Do you own any part of the farming operation, or is it still all in mom and dad's name? Are you being able to step into phase 3 and start making management decisions, or are you basically, hired labor, just like all the other employees? Because the reality is, if I don't have a roadmap for how this operation is going to become mine, if I've got a treasure map, which essentially says, hey, we want you to be part of the family business, but we're going to wait for the funeral to pass everything, then the treasure map essentially says, you know what, there's a lot of things like the nursing home, which I consider quicksand, and divorce, which is pirates, things like that may grab the farm and keep it out of your control. So I really want to challenge every younger generation. Do I have a roadmap for how this family business and operation is going to be mine someday in the future? Or do I have a treasure map? Now, one of the things that we're starting to try to do is we're trying to develop a set of resources that can help you through this process. So one of the resources that we're going to encourage you to go online and download is we've actually created a little worksheet that says, hey, phase 1, what's your anticipated start date of phase 1? What's your anticipated end date of phase 1? So that's where I want them to go away, right? What's my evaluation milestones? What do I want them to learn before they're allowed to come back into the operation. What's the anticipated start date of phase 2 and the end date of phase 2? And at what point do I feel like my son or daughter has learned enough to advance to the next phase? During that process, what production decisions am I going to make as the senior generation? What financial decisions am I going to make? What production decisions is my successor going to make? See, this forces us to start putting some things that we can say, yeah, I'm going to let them make that group of decisions. And it's just kind of a worksheet to help you start thinking through that and seeing, am I truly preparing the next generation? And another thing that we're going to present to you that I'm going to let Katie take over and present is even another piece of low-hanging fruit that I think will really help you get started in this communication process as well. And I'll tell you what, Katie, I think I'll just run the screen. I'll just run the slides for you if you want. I'll give you permission to run them, but if it's easier, I'll just advance them for you.
Yeah, that sounds good. The delay sometimes gets me.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Wesley. So one of the first things that is a great kind of tool in your toolkit as you start this road down your succession plan is what we call a short-term operating plan. And first off, we have to give credit where credit is due. This tool was developed by a grant through North Central Extension Risk Management Education and the USDA. So nod to them. So Wesley, if you want to advance. So our short-term operating plan, in terms of succession planning, kind of think of this as your senior operator's playbook. So this is what he's doing day to day, week to week, month to month, that is probably so just ingrained in his everyday thought process that it's, comes as naturally as, you walking down and putting his shoes on kind of thing. But to someone walking into the operation, it might be things that aren't known to them, just by nature. They might need to be told. So this plan was developed to help families continue operating should a primary operator be unable to. So originally we developed this plan during COVID, and it's kind of, grown and changed as we've continued to make edits to it. One of the nice things about this plan as well is it's available in several different formats. We do have a paper format. It's available online to print off. It's also online as a fillable PDF. And the next thing that it is available through, Wesley, if you want to advance, is ag plan. And here you're seeing kind of a quick one shot of what this looks like. So ag plan is available as an online tool as well through a partnership with University of Minnesota. And the nice thing about the online version is you create an account with an email address and a password. And once you've created that account, it's a cloud-based program. So you can allow access to multiple family members with their email addresses. They can get into that plan as well and see what you've written, make notes, and it allows a lot of people to access the information digitally. So if something does happen, you're not having to think, what filing cabinet did Dad put that in? Or if your filing system is that of my husband's, what pile of papers on the desk is that plan in? So it's a great tool to have, being online, easy for multiple people to find. So Wesley? So the short-term operating plan was designed to capture the useful information with concise input. So there's not a lot of typing, not a lot of information that we're going to ask that be entered, just very short little snippets of information that someone would find useful if they had to fill the shoes of the primary operator. So for the plan, we considered short-term, 2 to 8 weeks, just something to get you into the interim, but it really does capture the day-to-day workload of a farm. And again, it organizes the information. It's in one document. It can save time, reduce stress. If something does happen to the primary operator, that's obviously going to be a stressful time on a family anyway. They have that information They know in advance where they can find it. It's just one thing they don't have to worry about. So Wes? So kind of what is the meat and potatoes of the plan? So the plan is made up of 6 parts. So not every operation is going to use every part, but almost every operation will fill out information in part 1, which is general information. And that's going to cover just things like utilities, who's the water company, where are the shutoffs, banking information, insurance information, and insurance agent and policy information all goes into part 1. So just kind of the day-to-day things that have to be done there, to take care of business on the farm. Part 2 is going to be land information. That's another part that most operations will fill out. So if you have rented ground, either as the tenant or the landlord, you put that information in there. If there's easements on properties that people need to be aware of, that's where that information goes as well. Part 3 covers anything pertaining to livestock, whether that be, cattle or small ruminants, sheep and goats, feeding information, vet, so on and so forth. 4 deals with crop information. Here might be, sales of grain. If grain needs to be delivered at an elevator on a certain date to meet a contract, that information would be put in there as well. Crop insurance, things of that nature. 5 is horticulture. So if you are a fruit and vegetable grower, their operations look a little bit different. So we've, included a part for them. And lastly, part 6, just equipment. So, inventory of equipment that might be on your operation, as well as any like service information. Advance, please. So lastly, the short-term operating plan will need to be updated periodically. So depending on your farm and how your farm operates, I would say at least, once or twice a year updating, if not maybe checking it a little bit more often if things change more often on your operation. But lastly, and why we wanted to include this today, and we're going to discuss later the importance of family meetings. This is a great tool to use in your farm succession planning because it puts the information needed to run the farm business in one place. It allows access to multiple family members so they know where that information is located and how to get that information. And it's a great conversation starter for longer term planning. It's a wonderful tool to have at a first family meeting that Wesley's going to talk about here in a little bit. When you sit down with, the primary operator and any family that's going to, be involved in succession plan. And it's a great tool to say, this is where we are now. This is what I'm responsible for. Gets everyone on the same page and really can help set some expectations as that succession plan is thought through and worked out. So short-term operating plan, it's a great tool. I think Mallory is going to drop in the chat the link. She has done that. So if anybody, has any additional questions or needs help accessing it, please let us know. But I am going to turn it back over to Wesley.
Thanks, Katie. And Katie just brought up a very good thing. Do not hesitate to put a question in chat. We're hopefully going to end a little bit early and have a little bit of time for you to ask some more questions, but we really want to get to your questions. So if you have something that, you think of as we're going through here, please drop it in the chat so that we can know that we need to address that. I do really think, I really like what Katie just presented. I think that, as I said, I described it as low-hanging fruit. That can be a really good way for getting the discussion going. I know another one of my colleagues used to do it by basically when he'd have a family meeting with a family, he'd put all their names in a hat and then he'd pull out a name and said, okay, that person just dropped dead. Does everybody know exactly what that person does and where all their resources are and how to get those jobs done? Who's going to pick up all of those things? I think this is pretty important in the day and age of COVID and other things that we know what everyone's doing. We know where all the information is. And this is a really cool free tool that I always get confused, short-term operating plan, for you to be able to utilize. Now, I want to go back to talking a little bit about how we separate some of those family roles from some of those business roles. And if you think about it, every business has owners, right? Whether we are talking about Philip Morris or whether Nestle or your family farm, every business has owners. And the owners of a business all have roles and responsibilities as an owner, right? And they're also entitled to different things. So an owner is entitled to a return on their equity, but they have to fulfill their responsibilities as an owner to receive that return on equity. Now, every business also has employees. Someone makes this business run, right? Someone manages it. Someone does the labor. Every business is going to have a group of employees and managers. As such, all those employees have different roles and responsibilities than the owner, right? And as such, they're entitled to compensation for their time. Now, if we're talking, about a little hardware store where the person that runs it at the front desk is also the owner, then those two circles sit right on top of one another, right? But sometimes those circles are a little bit separated. So sometimes I've got outside investors that put money into my business. Sometimes I've got employees that work for me that are not owners. But the reality is we have to think about those two circles as independent. As an owner of a business, I've got roles. As an employee in a business, I've got different roles. That is fairly easy and straightforward for us to understand. What makes it much, much more complicated is when we realize, wait a minute, there's the third circle, isn't there? There's a family circle. Well, what is a person in the family circle entitled to? Well, they're entitled to love and respect, right? I can't kick them out of my family circle. But what if they're not in my business circle? Or what if they're not in my ownership circle? How does that affect my family business? I am going to tell you guys one little piece of nugget, all right? If you want to make this process a little simpler, once you've had your first child, stop. It becomes a little bit easier when you've only got one child to think about here. It gets a little bit more complicated. But even then, let's say it's my wife and I and one child, and and we have a very successful farm business, and my child says, I don't want to work in the family business. I want to go be a pharmacist. All right. Well, how does that affect our roles in the family circle versus the business circle? I could spend 2 to 4 hours probably talking about these three circles, because eventually every family that's in conflict within that I'm working with, generally at some point we end up taking a piece of paper and drawing these three circles and talking about what the roles and responsibilities are in each of these circles. Because the reality is, even though they have overlap, we need to start thinking of them as independently, okay? So, perfect example. Mom and dad and 2 boys operate the family farm, all right? Unfortunately, dad passes away. So mom continues to run the family business with the 2 sons. However, one of the sons is a really, really good cowman, but he just is he's a little problematic, okay? He doesn't get along with others. He's mean to everyone else. He's always causing strife, and he's just a difficult person to deal with. And so, someone said, well, have you sat him down and talked to him about what this is doing to everyone else? Have you thought of it like a performance evaluation? And so, mom put a lot of thought and prayer into that. And she did. She jotted down on a piece of paper. She jotted down some things that she needed him to improve on, some things that he did very, very well, but other things that he needed to improve on, like a performance evaluation. After the son read it, he wads it up in a big old wad. He throws it in the trash, and he goes on out to work. All right. He goes back to taking care of the cows. Totally ignores his mother for her suggestions. All right. The family situation continues to deteriorate, and eventually a consultant has to be brought in. And in the family discussions with the consultant, this incident is brought up. And so finally, the consultant asked the young man, said, if you had not been working for your mom, if you had been working for the local co-op in town or the local equipment dealer, and you had done that, what would have happened? And he kind of laughed and he said, I'd have been fired, you know? And he said, well, let's draw these three circles out separately. All right. You and your brother are in the family circle. Right now, your mom is the owner. She owns this family farm. She owns everything. You guys don't own anything. But you and your brother are employees of your mother's family business. All right. You're both in the family circle. You're both in the business circle. Your mom's in the ownership circle. Let's think of these circles, though, not with overlap, but let's totally separate them out. What is your role in the business circle? Well, I'm supposed to take care of the cows. Yeah. If you don't do that well, if you don't do it in a manner that works with everyone, all the other employees, can you be fired from the business circle? Well, I'm family. No, wait a minute. The circles are separate. Yes, you are family. You are over here in the family circle. But what about your role in the business circle? Can you be fired in the business circle? Wait a minute, I'm family. No, the circles are separate. Finally, the son realized, yeah, I'm an employee of my mother as the owner of this business. And yes, I can be fired from my business circle without affecting my role over here in the family circle. But you know what the real eye-opening part, not only in that situation was? Mom realized, wait a minute, I am treating everything as mom. I am thinking of myself all as mom, but I am also the owner of this business, and my son is an employee. So mom realized she could fire her son. Long story short, but eventually that family was able to work through their dysfunction. But the reality is we had to help them realize to separate the three circles and to think about their different roles in each of those. One of these days, I'm going to go to a custom hat maker, and I'm going to have a hat made with three different bills. One that says owner, one that says employee, and one that says family, because I have to realize I have to wear a different hat based on lots of different situations. See, unfortunately, mom and son were interacting with the thought of their family circle. They weren't thinking of their roles from the owner and business circle. So it really becomes important to think about trying to separate those circles. It also becomes really important when I start thinking about if I've got more than one child, but only one child is going to be in my business circle. How am I going to do the ownership circle? How am I going to think about those relationships back and forth after I'm gone? Because I'm not going to be here all the time. Another wonderful example I love to share is I've got a family that 1,500 acres, 600 cows, very, very successful farming business. 4 kids in the family. But unfortunately, none of the kids are part of the cattle operation. They all grew up and had other successful careers. None of them ever wanted to be a cattle producer. So none of them are in the business circle. They're all in the family circle. So the owner is trying to decide, how do we do this? How do we look going forward? And one of the questions, that ultimately it gets to is, what do you want to do with your business? Do you want to see your business continue? Just like that very first slide that I showed, that Dr. Baker showed. Do you want to see your business continue, or do you just want to give your stuff to the kids and let them do whatever they want to with it? Ultimately, this producer said, hey, I built up this herd of 600 cows that I've invested my whole life in. I don't want to see them sold off and gone. I want to see it continue, but none of my kids want to do it. So what are we going to do? Well, he got to thinking about it, and he had 2 key employees that had really, really helped him throughout his life get to where he is today. So he said, the problem is I've never made a lot farming. Unfortunately, I built this empire, but I've never really made a lot. So my employees haven't really been compensated the way I would like. What can I do? And so we kind of devised an idea of, well, if you want to see your cattle herd stay together, and you don't want to see it sold off, but none of your kids want to take it over, why not give each of those, why not think about the land separate from the cattle enterprise? And why not give each of those key employees, you got 2 of them, why not give each of them 2.5% of the cow herd over a year. All right. So if you farm another 10 years, all right, or unfortunately, if you pass away, then hopefully if you make it another 10 years, then by that time, each of these two employees will have 25% of the cows. All right. And that way, then they will, between the two of them, will have half of the equity in the cow herd. They can turn around and buy the other half from you or from your kids. Now what are we going to do? We don't want them sitting there with 600 cows and no place to run them. So the farmer decided, hey, I'm going to leave my 1,500 acres to my 4 kids, but I know none of them really want to farm, and I know they're just going to turn around and sell it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it to them, but I'm going to make them lease it to these 2 key employees for a period of 15 years. By the end of 15 years, hopefully these 2 employees will be on their, on their own, and they can either buy their own land or buy this land. But at that point, the kids can do whatever they want to with it. But again, it's just thinking about, I'm going to view each of them separate, not only of the roles and responsibilities in it, but I'm also going to view it separate as what someone's entitled to. All right. What is someone entitled to because in the family circle? How is that different than what someone is entitled to in the ownership circle? And I actually have one family, that very, very large operation. It's not just mom and dad and the kids. It's mom and dad and the kids. It's the brother and his kids. It's the uncle and his kids. So there's like over 20 people that are involved in this very, very large operation. And the way they view these 3 circles is they say, hey, you're born into this family. We can't kick you out of the family circle. And as such, you are all entitled to love and respect in this family circle. All right. But if you want to work in the family business, you're given an opportunity and you're going to be compensated for that. If you work in the family business, if you want to work at the feedlot, you can do it. If you want to work in the row crop side, you can do that. But we're going to require you to get qualifications to work, to have that occupation. See, it's an opportunity. It's not an entitlement. All right. So I don't have to employ my sister's son just because he has 3 DWIs and can't get a job elsewhere. You actually have to have qualifications to get a job in the family business. But they also view the ownership circle separately as well. They essentially say when you become an adult, you are given a choice. Do you want to be in the ownership circle of our 20 plus corporation? And if you do, you either have to purchase your way in or earn your way in. All right. And so you're given a choice. And some people decide in that, no, I'm fine just staying in the family circle. I don't want to be a part of the family business as an employee or an owner. Some people will say, yeah, I think it's a good investment. I want to invest as an owner in this business, but I don't really want to work in the family business. And some people actually do the opposite. They say, yeah, I want a job and I want to be well compensated for my time, but I'm not at the place where I can buy my way in. And so it's just thinking about how we separate those 3 circles and keep them completely independent. Now, I said I use those 3 circles to help address conflict a lot of time. There are lots of conflicts, right, in the family business. We are just going to talk about 2. And this is going to be a little bit different since we're doing this virtually versus in person. But I want to challenge you to think about the first conflict, being fair versus doing what's right to try to preserve the farm. So we're going to launch a poll here that I want you to respond to. Should the on-farm heir, the one that's going to take over my operation, have to buy out their off-farm brothers and sisters? So I'm assuming you've got 4 kids and one wants to continue the farm. Should that one have to buy out the other ones that may not live anywhere around? Yes or no? And if yes, then why? And one of the reasons I throw this conflict out to start is because almost every one of you are going to deal with this if you have more than one child. So we've got 54% said yes, 46% said no. That's about right down the line. And as I said, I throw this question out in practically every workshop I do, not because I have the answer. Trust me, I don't have the answer. It's different for every family situation, but it's something that each of you are going to have to deal with. When I scroll down to look at the yeses, why did you say yes? It's important to preserve the farm first, some said, only on negotiated terms for less than market value. All of the siblings have worked on the farm at some point. So yeah, yes, but for another reason. Why did you say no? Some people said no because this will force the farm to have to sell outside the family. Some said no because the on-farm sibling will never be able to pay for it. The farm assets should go to someone who's worked for them, or no for another reason. Yeah. Again, I think it becomes really interesting to get everyone's input. And when I first started doing these workshops, people told me no one will want to talk about this. They won't want to talk with their neighbors because they won't want their neighbors thinking what they're thinking about doing. And I find it's just the opposite. When we get tables started talking about it, we can't get the tables to shut up to go on with the rest of the workshop, because everyone loves talking about, well, what have you thought about this? Well, I'm thinking about doing this. Well, what about you? You know, if you think about it, this is a relatively new phenomenon. 50 years ago, we didn't have this discussion. 50 years ago, the oldest son got the farm, but it was always pretty much a given that the one that stayed on the farm generally had a lower standard of living than all of the kids that went off the farm. And I'm not 100% sure it's any different today. I'm not sure that the farmer doesn't make less than the kid that goes off the farm and becomes a pharmacist or a welder or a teacher or something like that. But the reality is land values just keep going up. And so we don't generate much cash, right? We don't generate much cash, but we build wealth. The land goes up in value, so we don't make enough money to take our family on a decent family vacation. But when we die, suddenly we got this asset that's worth a lot of money. I wrote a column, one of my columns I titled, "Could you afford to start over tomorrow? Could you, as a senior generation, afford to buy the land, the machinery, and the livestock and all start over tomorrow at full market price?" You know, and we all know we couldn't. None of us pretty much could. So I posed the question, if you can't start over tomorrow, is it fair to require your son or daughter to have to start over at full market price the day after the funeral? Now, do not walk away from here and say, you know, Wesley Tucker just said that we're just going to screw all the off-farm kids. That is not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is you have to understand that you have an intersection between your estate and succession planning. And often I do my succession planning saying, yeah, I want my son or daughter to take over and I want them to be successful. But then in the estate plan, I don't make any provisions to give them a chance to do that, right? I don't give them any chance to be able to actually be financially stable, because what I want to avoid is the day after the funeral, other kids being able to walk up, put their hand out and say, okay, I want my money and I want it now. Because if that is the case, then as many of you said, the one that's trying to take over will never be able to make it, because since we don't generate enough cash, the farm won't make the land payments. I always in my workshops, I ask if there's a banker in the group, and I usually pose the question, okay, Mr. Banker, I walk up to you. I am one of 4 kids. I have just inherited 25% of the family farm. Will you give me a loan to buy the other 75% from my 2 brothers and my sister? And the reality is, unless the farm is different than most, there is no way it is going to cash flow at borrowing 75%. What if I've got someone in my workshop last night said, well, I've only got 2. So I'll ask the same question. Will the banker give a loan to buy half of the farm? Well, that's a pretty good equity situation, but unfortunately, often it still won't cash flow. So we have to think about, if the farm doesn't generate enough cash to make the debt payments, how can I get creative so that my son or daughter can keep the business together and still compensate some of those off-farm heirs, but not at the expense of making the on-farm heir go broke? And, you know, and one of the questions generally in a family meeting, we generally come back to this question is, how important is it to you that a Smith will continue to farm Smith land. If that is extremely, extremely important to you, then we're going to have to get creative and we're going to have to put some rules in place. We're going to have to make sure that we've established those linkages between those kids before we're gone. And, there are tools in the toolbox. That there are different things that we can do. If there's life insurance or any other kind of cash, liquid assets, those really help to being able to do that whole equal versus fair thing. But often there's not. Often we've rolled all of our money back into the farm. So at that point, we have to start thinking about buy-sell agreements, first option to purchase, thinking about it at a minimum, separating the farm assets from the land, separating the farm operating assets like the cows and the machinery for that off-farm, for the on-farm kid versus the land, treating those separately. Maybe we create different entity structures. People always want to ask me about LLCs and different things like that. Maybe we use the trust and long-term leases. But I just really want to stress that for me as a succession planner, yes, I have goal number 1 to successfully transition the farm to the next generation. But I also have goal number 2 and number 3, which is to do it in the best way to give the next generation the best chance they have to be a thriving business. And I cannot lock them into too much debt on day 1 if I want them to actually have a chance to survive. And the goal number 3 is just as important, is to protect family relationships. Okay. And if I don't do some of these things, if I don't reach for some of the tools in the toolbox, will your kids ever have another Christmas dinner at your household after you and your spouse are gone? The thing that I find so many times is people know there's going to be conflict, but they say, my kids are good kids. They'll work it out after I'm gone. That is the number 1 recipe for disaster. All right. You work it out. You work it out with your kids, have the family discussions, talk about this thing, and develop a plan for how this is going to work after you're gone. That will do so much to protect your family business, but it will also protect the family. All right. It will also protect the family. All right. I usually start workshops on this, but I threw this in here. Are you comfortable with the day after the funeral, the cattle are all loaded up and taken to the sale barn? Are you comfortable with the auction company contacted to schedule the equipment auction? And are you comfortable with the land listed with a realtor? Again, that very first slide that Dr. Baker showed, if all you're concerned about is getting your assets to your kids and then they can sell them the day after your funeral, that's fine. There is nothing wrong with that. But if my goal is that I definitely want to see a Smith farming Smith land, I want to see this held together as a business, then I've got to do it. I've got to do this differently. All right. And I would also say, when I talk to those beginning farmer groups, the younger generation, I will say the sooner you get this established, the better. What I routinely see is that one of the spouses dies. So mom or dad dies, generally because we men go first. It's the dad dies, and son or daughter, whether they've been involved in the operation before or now, they come back. And today land is worth $3,000 an acre. And the son or daughter comes back and says, don't worry, mom, I'll help you hold things together. I'll help you run this and help you do this. They invest in the farm with their own money and their own sweat. Mom lives another 20 years down the road. Now that son or daughter gets to buy out their siblings, but now land is no longer $3,000 an acre. It was when they came back. Now land is $9,000 an acre. So, why did we not think about letting them start buying their way in or creating a buy-sell agreement when that son or daughter came into the operation 20 years ago? The sooner you establish those plans, the better it is for the younger generation, and the better the chance that they actually have a chance to be successful. Now, is that unfair to the off-farm kids? Again, I don't think so if they're the ones actually investing in it and doing it. But you see, I told you, I don't want to wait for the final funeral I don't want to wait for the event of estate planning to make this process work. I want them to actually start buying and earning their way in earlier in the process. And then that actually gets around a whole lot of this fair versus equal debate if we don't wait until the very last minute to do this. And it doesn't have to be at full market price. We can do it at whatever we want to. But the sooner they get on the pathway to ownership, it's good for them, and it's actually good for the entire family dispute, to be quite honest with you. This is another one of those issues that I find almost every family has to face at some point. Why is it so hard for dad or grandpa to relinquish control of management decisions? Why is it so hard for dad or grandpa? And I'll be honest with you, 99 times out of 100, it's harder for dad than it is mom. It's harder for dad than it is mom. Often by the time she's 65 or 70, mom's ready to get an RV and travel and see the grandkids more. Often dad can't let go of either the tractor, the planter, or the cows. So why is it so hard for dad or grandpa to give up control? And we've got some choices for you to pick there. The number one thing is it is their whole identity and provides meaning for their life. Absolutely. I cannot agree more. You know, I told you I get to teach some supervisor classes, you know, and there is no doubt that there is generational differences between people. But I always remember Dr. Baker sharing this story. He used to say, tell about this one farmer that he had. He said the senior farmer was just always reluctant to turn over the control to his son. And he knew both of them and knew they were both very, very capable individuals. But the senior generation just kept saying, my son's just not ready. He's just not ready. And so finally, Dr. Baker asked him, he said, well, when do you think your son will be ready? All right, because you've been telling me this for years. And he said, I think another 5 years. I think he'll be ready. Can you guys think about how old this older generation might be? I'm not making this up, folks. The senior farmer was 96 and his son was 72. So, you know, Dr. Baker used to make the joke, well, you better be taking good care of your health if you're not going to give up until you're 101 years old. So the reality is, who was not ready? It wasn't that his 72-year-old son, who was very capable, wasn't ready. It was that he wasn't ready to give up, right? And as I said, I know there are generational differences. My grandfather lived through the Great Depression and World War II, so that made him very, very much heavy on the duty before pleasure. You know, hard work from sun up till sundown, the duty before pleasure. So he did not want to quit. My dad, who was a baby boomer, went through a very different set of circumstances. And for baby boomers, their career is about their life. You know, unlike my grandfather who worked to just have food on the table, my father, it was their career was their life. And so baby boomers have a hard time retiring, even non-farmers. But I think it goes way beyond even the generational issues for farmers, because this is one of my fellow board members on the International Farm Transition Network. He's from Ireland, and he's been doing a ton of research into this idea of symbolic capital, because Ireland has come up with multiple programs to try to help the older generation pass on the farm to the younger generation sooner. And they just keep stubbing their toe and not getting much uptake. And he's finally realizing that, you know, we talk a lot as economists about economic capital and social capital and cultural capital, but symbolic capital is something completely different. Symbolic capital is our sense of belonging and identity in society. See, for a small sheep producer in the country of Ireland, if I turn over my sheep herd and my land to my son, then I can no longer go to the coffee shop and visit with my fellow sheep producers because I'm no longer part of the club. I'm no longer a sheep owner. I'm no longer a landowner now because I've given it up to my son. All right. And so what they find is how much that affects people's mental stability and their feeling of value and self-worth. Now, contrast that to a non-farmer. All right. Contrast that to someone who has taught school for 30 years or a mechanic for 30 years. They look forward to retirement. It's something to be celebrated. I've accomplished this. I'm here. I'm so glad to be here. I don't have to go to school and teach those snot-nosed brats anymore. All right. Think about how a farmer views retirement. It is something that they fear, right? because of all the reasons that you guys said. Yes, they are worried that the next generation will mess it up. They are worried about a lot of other things. Could you lose it? All of this stuff. But the biggest fear is, if I give up the cows and the planter, what am I? What am I? Okay. Remember that succession plan that I told you? I become a grunt, I go to an assistant manager, and I become a CEO. I've got about 15 years left with Extension, and my main passion for the next 15 years is helping farmers understand I do not have to die to let my son or daughter take over. I can transition to a role of an advisor or a mentor. Now, I have no preconceived notions that I understand that is the hardest transition a farmer will ever make. But at some point, I usually stop and ask the older generation, which do you value more, your success or seeing your kids be successful? Because American culture tells me that life is a game. Life is a game that you are supposed to scratch and claw and accumulate until you draw your final breath. And so that's why at a recent land sale, we had two farmers fighting over this piece of land. One was 84 and one was 92. And so they're fighting until their absolute end. But see, do I want to be successful, or do I want to see my kids be successful? Because I have literally seen farmers sabotage their kids so that they can continue winning the game themselves. I had a dairy operation that, nice sized dairy, very, very successful. What's the biggest challenge in dairy other than feed cost? Well, it's getting labor, right? So one of the kids, the daughter actually wanted to locate, there was a house and a small parcel of land, a small 40 available just adjacent to the farm at the end of the driveway. And so the daughter and son-in-law were trying to buy the house and 40 acres. That would have been great, right? How many of you would like to have your grandkids at the end of the driveway and also have extra laborers for the dairy? The farmer actually ended up buying the piece of property out from under their kids. Well, I always wanted that 40. That 40 completes my farm, and I always wanted to add that 40 to my farm. Would it not have completed the farm if the daughter owned it? They literally sabotaged their kids. We are just coming off of this last winter. We had the Winter Olympics, right? When we watch the Olympics, there are some individual competitions and there are some team competitions. I'm going to be honest with you. The hardest transition for a farmer to make, and especially dad, is to understand that at some point in life, my role on this family business, see, a family business is a team competition. It's not an individual sport. My role on this team has to go from being the star quarterback, calling all the shots, transitioning to the advisor or the coach, and letting my son or daughter become the star quarterback. That's not withdrawal. I'm still involved in the operation. I'm still very much needed in the operation. But at some point, I have to be willing to take a step back and let my role in the operation change. That is how I get second and third and fourth generation farms that stay together, when I can make this step back and I can help advise them, but not micromanage and keep everything within my control and my power until the day after the funeral. Okay. We've actually created another worksheet that Mallory's going to be dropping into the chat to help you deal with this. And I just challenge you to think about those three circles. So I say, list everyone in your family circle, list everyone in your business circle, list everyone in your in the ownership circle. And then I have a list of questions that we placed in there to make you start thinking about, what is my role and responsibility in that circle, and what does it take to move from one circle to the next? For years I've told families, I want you actually sitting down and talking to your kids and saying, what ownership roles do they want 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do they just want hunting rights? Do they want the money rather than the land? Would they rather just have a smaller amount of cash than the land? Do they want to own the land, but then they're going to turn around and sell it? So get their ideas on what they want, and then you make a plan for how all your kids are going to function together. So there's actually a worksheet, as I said, and there'll be more coming in the future to help you work through this process. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Mallory to start talking about how we improve our communication and really start getting extremely intentional about family meetings.
Thank you, Wesley. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So this is a bit of a rhetorical question. We won't have any more polls today, but each of you have a different situation. You've got different complications within your own family dynamic. Here's examples. It could be between you and your kids. It could be among your kids. It could be, between the heirs that are in the business versus the heirs that have no interest in the business. And that's been already surfaced in the chat today. You've also got the issue for some families. There's rifts between the people who are blood relatives and the people who are not blood relatives. Or whether it's the heirs and the actual non-family individuals who either own or work on that farm. Whatever the state of your operation is, the communication tools we're going to share with you now will help you improve that situation. So I'm going to talk about 3 different communication strategies: operating meetings, business meetings, and family council meetings. You're probably, if you're doing anything, you're most likely holding an operating meeting. These happen daily or weekly, where you can just talk about those day-to-day decisions or what needs to happen this week, etc. I want to spend more time on the family business meetings and the family council meetings. Next. So, like I said, this happens, routine stuff, probably happens on the farm already. Next. Let's talk about those family business meetings. Here we want people who are involved in the day-to-day operation, those individuals in that business circle. This might include other people like your lender, important vendors for the farm. When you're trying to make a decision about what the farm needs to do differently to resolve debt, to start a transition process, this is more about, these meetings are designed to work on the business instead of working in the day-to-day of the business. So it's about strategic planning. When should you hold these? It depends where your farm operation is. How many issues do you have? This kind of meeting allows you to dig into a deeper issue. And please do not try to hold these on the farm. It's too easy for folks to get distracted, for emergencies to come up, somebody to pull into the driveway and derail the whole situation. This is a business. Treat it like a business. Go off farm to have a focused, productive conversation, or what might end up being a series of conversations. Some of the things you can do during these meetings, if you've never held a meeting like this and you have no idea what you might do, consider drawing out a decision authority tree for your farm. How do decisions get made now, and how might they be made in the future as you start bringing other individuals more intentionally through those 5 phases? So right now, one person may make all the decisions. The goal here is to start transitioning sets of decisions to other people in the family. And if you have no idea where to start that process, then we recommend you actually get together, give everybody a set of Post-it notes, and literally write down the key decisions that this farm operation needs to make in the next year. What are the marketing, the purchasing? If you're leasing or want to renegotiate a lease, if you're thinking about buying equipment or property, what are all of those decisions for your operation? The larger your operation, the more decisions, the more pieces of paper you're going to need. But take some time as a group to write those down, and then step back and start organizing them. Put things in themes of decisions. And now suddenly you're identifying a group of decisions that can live under an individual, a decision maker. So this is how you can start putting things together. And once you've done that, what you've actually done is started the first draft of a job description on your farm. You may have one, you may have multiple, but going back to use these meetings as a strategic way to advance your business, we challenge you to write job descriptions. It doesn't have to be overly formal. It doesn't have to be really long. There's even an online tool from Vermont that will help you get started, but put it on paper. Be clear about whose role it is to make what decisions on the farm, and then return to those job descriptions and have an honest evaluation between both parties, the owner and the person making the decisions. There's all the other things you could address in these meetings, like your employment policy. As Wesley said, does a family member, are they guaranteed a job, or is it an opportunity to get a job on the farm? Compensation packages should be reviewed regularly on a farm business. And if you're thinking about really starting to work your way through those phases, when are you ready to separate out a piece of the farm into a different entity? Those are the kinds of conversations you should have during a family business meeting. Something else that the farm may want to do is really step back and think about our goals. If we have a lot of debt, if we know markets are shifting, if we've got some younger people in the operation that have different ideas, where does this family want to take this business? Be open and transparent about that, because too often farm families just don't discuss that, right? And without discussing it, you may realize that the family is shooting at different targets. So get on the same page and actually be strategic about the farm's future. The other kind of meeting that we encourage you to hold are the family council meetings. Now, these are a bit different. Go back to our circles. We want everybody in that family circle present at a family council meeting. All the spouses, all the in-laws, all the children, the grandparents, grandchildren only if they're old enough to sit there and thoughtfully participate. This is an opportunity for the senior operators to inform all the family members about that family business. I say senior operator, anybody who owns the farm, right? You may not be the senior person in your family, but if you are that farm owner now, you want to keep everybody else in the family informed. You want to be able to tell the family about issues that are going to impact the business, where you want to take the business, and you want to clarify expectations they may have about what they will or will not get out of this business. We suggest you have these at least once a year, perhaps more often if you're really starting that family transition process. This is a hard conversation, or could be, but when we say we have to be intentional about communication, this is what it looks like. You actually plan a meeting, get everybody there, and you start talking very openly and transparently about the farm's future. Again, don't do it on the farm. Plan it in advance. Pick somewhere where everybody can be present and fully engaged. And don't forget about your out-of-state family members. It is perfectly tax deductible to fly them in for this business meeting. Or in today's technology, set up a Zoom call or some other online mechanism to allow them to participate, but that can be really tricky. We have lots of tips about how to prepare for an effective meeting. I'm going to drop something in the chat, a worksheet that we've developed. We're going to be putting out some more resources, so I'm going to move a little quickly so we can get to questions. Send out an agenda. Don't surprise people. Assign roles so that everybody has clear notes about what happens. Everybody knows in advance who's leading the meeting and who is not leading the meeting. And the first meeting should be led by the owners of the farm. And decide for your farm business how you are going to make decisions. Here are a few different options you might consider. You may choose a different strategy depending on the type of decision you're trying to make. So the owner of the farm, it's perfectly within your right to say, you can offer me any advice. I will take that advice under consideration, but this is my farm and I will make the decisions. You could choose to adopt a consensus approach. We're all going to sit here, we're going to talk it out until we've reached a consensus among the group, and that will be the decision. Or you could take a majority rule approach, and then you have to decide how you assign votes. Does everyone get an equal vote? Do you give people proportional shares based on their ownership or their involvement in the farm? But those are three different strategies. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but we think the owner of the farm should be the one who sets these parameters, and it's their prerogative to change those parameters over time. Just be clear with everybody else, here are the ground rules that we're all playing by. Lots of tips for what to do actually during the meeting. The hardest one is probably don't make things personal, which is why, we talked so much about family roles, business roles, ownership roles. When you walk into a family council meeting, you're really focusing on that business and the future management and ownership of it. You're going to love people at the end. But when you're in that meeting, it's not about family dynamics. It's about the future of the farm. Stick to the agenda, start and end on time. Next. We'll also have resources about how to do active and reflective listening. This is hard. Communication isn't easy, but it takes practice. And the reason we stress communication so lengthy in this presentation today is that without active communication, most people stall making any decision about this. Most people deny that there is an issue or put it off or say that I'm not going to worry about that. Plenty of people are happy just to say they'll figure it out when I die. I hope we've convinced everyone that's not a good strategy. So by being more open and talking, you can actually develop stronger strategies for how you address conflict within your family. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be very messy. The more intentional you are about it, the longer you work on it and start early, the more you can get to the point where you're recognizing conflict and you're actually working together as a group to resolve that conflict and find solutions. So here's a look at that resource that I dropped in the chat earlier. As I said in the chat, I'll send those out by email later. And again, going back to these conflict, challenging relationships, you can think about how these different types of meetings are designed to help resolve different types of conflict. If you have more conflicts between people who are in the business versus out of the business, a family council meeting is designed to get everybody together and talk about that. So we hope that these resources will help you resolve conflicts.
So I just wanted to hop back in here real quick and say, I asked you at the beginning to think of, well, actually I didn't. I skipped that slide, didn't I? No, there's my first stub my toe for the day. So I want you to think about an operation. I want you to think about an operation that had a very, very successful farm business. But after the funeral, after the senior generation passed away, the wheels came off the bus and eventually the equipment was sold. And now someone else, not of the Smith family, owns and operates that farm. Okay. How would that family have been different if they had used the three resources that we've just given you today, the handouts that we've given you? We've given you a handout to think through the 5 phases. If that family had viewed succession planning as more important as a process than estate planning as an event, if that family had thought about what are my family roles, what are my business roles, what are my ownership roles, and how do I keep them separate? Yes, I may be in overlapping circles, but how do I view my responsibility in each of these circles as completely independent of one another? How would that family have functioned differently if they had actually communicated through a series of family meetings while the senior generation was alive before they passed away? Our goal is to provide you the tools and to talk about the topics that we think can prevent the wheels from coming off the bus after the senior generation passes away. And that's what we're trying to establish. We're trying to help you establish, how do we get this plan in place prior to our death? I'm not going to pull any punches. I tell everyone, you have two purposes before you die. You have two things you must do. You must plan to meet your maker when you do pass away, and you have to get this plan in place for your kids of how you want them to get along and function after you're gone. As Mallory said, do not just say, I've got good kids. They'll work it out because I know they all love each other and they'll get along. Again, after we go through an illness of our parents, we're not in the right frame of mind. And I've just seen too many times with the increasing land values, money, unfortunately, causes lots of messes. And I said again, families are messy. Families are messy. It's not that we haven't raised them right. It's not that we don't have good kids. It's just we've got to get extremely intentional and talk about these issues before they happen. That's what's so important about this.
So we've given you a whole list of resources in the chat. You'll be getting that from us. I'm finishing answering a question now, and I'm going to put an evaluation survey into the chat. Please fill this out now or later if you need to run. There's a place in there to provide your email address. This is a chance for you to opt in to ongoing communication from us around farm succession tools and resources. We're actually hoping to start a 12-month cohort. So every month you're going to get a new resource, a reminder, an additional video tool, because we feel so passionately about this and we're committed to really helping families get off of the not doing anything, making no decisions, stalling, denying that this is an issue that is important to their farm business. So that is your opportunity to opt in to those future communications from us. So like I said, please continue that evaluation. You'll also see 3 additional short surveys a month from now, 6 months, and 12 months, because we want to know, is it working? Is it not working? What additional support and resources will help improve the resiliency and strength of Missouri farms? And next. So just a little bit about us. We're part of Extension. We're the Ag Business Policy Extension Group. We have a great website. A ton of additional resources about managing your farm can be found here. We have a weekly radio segment called the Farm Management Minute, where we boil down our content to 1 minute every week, push that out to a series of radio partners across the state, and we also make it available online. Next. Here's an example of 2 recent materials that we put together. One is helping consumers link with livestock producers and actually buy meat from the farm. Another is we put together a survey every year and try to estimate Missouri farmland values. In our state, those sales aren't publicly disclosed, but it benefits a lot of people to just have some kind of idea of what is the going rate, what is a fair assessment of prices. So this is some of the work that we do. Next. And coming up, these are things you can look for us in the next 6 months. So we do a series of farm enterprise budgets, over 35 different budgets, Northern Missouri, Southern Missouri, the boot heel, all kinds of crops and livestock. Here's an example of goats. We update these every single October. So the 2023 farm enterprise budgets will be coming out in October. There's the short link for them. We're currently working on a whole video series to help farms navigate tight labor market. You can look for that coming in the new year. And we're also launching a farm lease series. We have some meetings scheduled for August 24th, but we're also developing a shorter segment online to help walk people through these concepts. Any questions? We hit you with a lot today.
I always describe it like you're trying to drink from a fire hydrant.